Welcome to this first edition of the Secure AI podcast hosted by Robbe AI. In this episode, I am delighted to welcome Robbe Van Roey. Robbe recently made the headlines in the news with his hacking of AWS AI systems and Nvidia. He could have caused a major financial impact for about 800 million euros. And 3 years ago, he did a similar thing for about $1.4 million. That's a whopping 570x of your value in 3 years' time. Who wouldn't sign up for such a business model? But obviously, Robbe is an ethical hacker. He didn't take the money. Robbe, I'm honored to have you on this podcast, and I'm looking forward to discussing all things security and AI with you.
Hey, it's so nice to be on here, and nice to meet you.
Well, let's dive right in. I actually don't know how you become an ethical hacker. So how did that go for you? How did you end up in this peculiar side of IT? Was your school network your first victim, or did you aim for a bank already?
So when I was 14 years old, I started learning about developing websites, and I thought that was super cool, creating websites. But then on YouTube, I saw some videos of people hacking websites, and I started to figure, well, are my own sites vulnerable? So I looked into it, and yes, they were. At that time, I was watching these YouTube videos, and to me, it all seemed like magic. This hacking world, it was all this magical thing with bits and bytes flying around. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I kept on watching the videos, and eventually when I was 16, I started learning about hacking myself. And all of a sudden, all those things that I saw in the videos, they started really coming back, and I started making the connections of, hey, that's what I saw 2 years ago. I couldn't understand it, but now I do. But I never started hacking on the dark side, to say. I never did anything illegal. I never even hacked my school network. I learned in lab environments. That's kind of what I did and how I learned. And then I still remember when I was 18, I got my first real engagement. And this is something I was super stressed about, because obviously for the past 2 years, I had just been working in lab environments, competing, and this was going to be my first real hack. And I still remember the CEO of this company. He really had no faith in me, but he just paid a student peanuts to do a pen test that would normally cost him like 10 times that much. So he was happy to give it a shot. And I remember my first day, I picked up my laptop, I sat down, and about 3 hours later, I was in. And that adrenaline rush of just within 3 hours compromising this company was so giant. And I still remember that I walked into the office of the CEO with like all the hashes of his 1,000 employees printed out on pieces of paper, being like, "Ow. Here you go. Do you not believe in me now?"
Okay.
And kind of that feeling of being able to do something so big with such little, like just plugging my computer into a network port allowed me to dump all the passwords of all employees within 3 hours. That is the kind of feeling that I love so much. And that's where the story started and has been going the past 6 years.
All right, cool. So it's really all about the adrenaline run. I think hacking something as public as AWS then is probably like the summit of adrenaline for you then. What were your findings when you got in? Is it like, do those organizations that you were able to expose have any valid reason for being hacked, or should they have been protected better?
I think every organization that gets compromised, they have valid reasons. We shouldn't shame a company that they got hacked because it is incredibly difficult to secure yourself. It only takes one small mistake and you can have 100 developers and 99 of them can be the best and most secure developers of the world. But if you have one of them in there that missed a little tiny thing, then now all of a sudden that one developer can write code that is vulnerable, affecting your entire organization. In the same way that you just need to have one employee that clicks a phishing email and they get in. So it's, there are organizations where there are so many security issues that indeed you can say, well, there's obviously management is not investing enough in security. I think with Amazon, with AWS, that is definitely not the case. They invest a lot in security. They also paid me nicely for my finding, which I am very happy about. But I've also worked with companies that decided not to pay me or that even claimed that what I reported was not a vulnerability at all, whereas clearly I had impact that showed it was a vulnerability. So, it can go both ways. in this world, but the big companies like Amazon, like Nvidia, they are obviously happy that somebody identifies this before a real attacker does.
It's not a matter of if you get hacked, but when you get hacked, they say.
Exactly.
So actually, the stuff that you found was specific to the cloud provider in this case,
Yes.
or to the configuration of the customer.
No, this was in one of the libraries of the cloud provider that they provide. So they had an AI library that did some AI things. And I find AI systems super interesting to attack because they have a whole new way of attacking them, but using old techniques, right? Usually it's very clear that you have user input flowing into an application. And if your application allows users to change files on the file system, then it's very clear user input going into the file system can lead to vulnerabilities. But with AI systems, you have kind of this middleman. You have the user input going into an AI, and then the AI has capabilities on the file system, on the network, or wherever. So you have this new kind of flow of tricking this AI into performing specific actions, and oftentimes companies, they don't consider that attack path because they're solely focused on user input flows into output. But in this case, there's this middleman that they also need to take into account, and that was missed,
So the AI becomes a user in itself.
Yeah, exactly. And AIs can, just like regular employees, AIs also get phished. And that's kind of all that, prompt injection is. It's phishing an AI into doing something. So we need to come up with ways to train the AI, like do phishing awareness trainings, but then for AI. And these are, of course, they look very different from employee phishing trainings, but it's the same principle. An AI is a user. An AI becomes an employee that performs tasks for your company and is influenced by its outside world. So you need to protect that.
And I guess definitely when we take it a notch further and agentic AI takes really stuff into its own hands and takes autonomous decisions, then it really becomes important that security sees AI as a user and acts upon it.
Definitely.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting. So as AI becomes also more prevalent in cybersecurity security defenses, there are a lot of startups in this space as well. How do you see your own role as an ethical hacker evolving? Are there new skills and new tools and expertise that you have to actually learn as a hacker in this AI space?
I think AI is not going to massively change the way that ethical hacking works. I think AI is, on the attack surface side, it's a totally new attack surface. So AI will be integrated in specific places and will become a new functionality to attack. Just like we have authentication as a functionality, or file uploads as a functionality, AI will be a new functionality that every ethical hacker will need to learn to attack. So that's one side. On the other side, there's obviously also attackers, ethical hackers, but also unethical hackers using AI to perform their work. And this, I think, there will be some really interesting changes. And I call these changes interesting because I really see AI as a workhorse. And the boring work that I am able to easily describe, AI will be able to do. And that gives me more time in every engagement to perform the interesting work that AI right now can do. On the other hand, there's also a lot of developers now using AI. And I think that this is going to increase the work that security professionals have to do a lot, because right now, what I'm seeing is that developers using AI to write code are writing less secure code. There's also been some studies that show that that is the case. Right now, AI is not at the level of security knowledge in writing code that a good developer is, which means that easy mistakes can still slip in. And also, when you have AI generate code, we've all done it. You get like a huge file of code, you just copy paste it, it works, and you don't want to touch it because you haven't written it yourself, because you don't know how it works. You don't want to spend hours looking into how it works. You're just happy that it works and you don't touch it anymore.
So there's a big pitfall for, well, let's call it laziness, or not going into the details because it works. Let's just keep it like that. This was a major efficiency gain for me. Let me move on. Okay.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
Security holes are actually caused by that. Interesting. Another layer of AI security or AI vulnerability is, we all know how to secure the outer shell. So APIs, you can secure them, HTTPS, etc., etc. a lot of companies, I think, to my feeling, see that AI itself, the core, the backbone of it, is a black box. Okay, and they just take it for granted that they cannot do anything about it. So, what's your take on running AI in some form of confidential compute platform so that you actually up the game of the core security of AI?
I think this ties in with the basic principles of security, and it's segregate as much as you can to make sure that you have an environment where your AI exists, you have an environment where the rest of your code exists, and they cannot do any cross-contamination. And by segregating a lot, it will make sure that if an attacker breaches one side of the equation here, if an attacker finds a way to execute arbitrary code on your systems and they're into your server, then you don't want them to be able to influence your AI systems. In the same way, if an attacker somehow finds out a way to influence AI systems and gets into that system, then you also don't want the reverse to happen. It's always a good idea to kind of separate as much as possible and create these trust boundaries of this is where this specific system has trust and another system has trust, but they cannot cross these boundaries. They cannot be trusted in other environments. I think it's a great step forward. And like you said, AI systems are a huge black box. So containing that black box and making sure that it's like in a safe spot is incredibly important, because if you don't fully understand how your AI system works and kind of why it does things or what's going on internally, then it will also be impossible for you to detect if something goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
So in the usual code that we write, we build in logging, we build in monitoring for stuff. Like when stuff goes wrong, we detect it and we can take action on it. But what about when things go wrong in an AI system that we have no control over, that we don't understand at all? Yeah. There's no way of even feeling or seeing that an attacker is in there or has modified stuff or was able to mess with training data, was able to mess with the model weights and influence decisions that way. If we can't detect that, that's very, very dangerous.
There's a lot of providers and solutions out there providing observability of model behavior, etc. In favor of transparency. Obviously, that does not work if your company is just using Copilot or GPT. Then, okay, too bad. You're actually choosing for a black box, correct? So, but there are a lot more options you have in terms of transparency and compliancy for your AI models if you're using an open model, right?
Yeah, I find like transparency and explainable AI, I find it very interesting because it's also kind of counterintuitive. Because in a way, if an AI is able to explain itself and say, I made this decision because of these and these and these reasons, then technically couldn't you have written that decision as an if statement? If this, then do this, right? So there must be some magical sauce there that we cannot explain, because that's why AIs are so popular. If we could just explain every decision an AI made, then we could have just wrote it with if-else statements. So, of course, this is a very oversimplification. Somewhere there is room for mistakes in this explainable AI. There is still a magical sauce that we don't understand. So I think fully trusting that explainable AI is also kind of an assumption that you make that perhaps doesn't always hold in extreme scenarios where advanced threats have ingrained themselves in a model. So, yes, explainable AI is very important, but let's also not be blindsided by the risks that we have with also blindly trusting those decisions.
Yeah, totally agree. So, okay, let's say it is a black box and explainability is a hard topic. It is a black box, but I still want to actually protect my model. And there are a couple of things you can do in that space, isn't there? Like, what strategies could you think of to protect against model inversion attacks, where attackers actually try to reconstruct sensitive training data by analyzing the model outputs?
Yeah, that's a very interesting attack, in my opinion. So, like, just to maybe put that in perspective for people who don't know it, let's say you have your iPhone that does the Face ID, right? You give it an image of your face, and it will then say, oh yeah, it's the right face, you can enter, it's the wrong face, you can't enter. Imagine that an attacker is able to give a face and get a response back from that AI and able to tell, oh, well, my eyebrows aren't quite in the right position. So maybe if I print out an image and I change the eyebrows a bit, then that will work. And then it says, oh no, now the mouth isn't correct. Attackers might be able to slowly extradite information from AI models that should be very private, that could be sensitive. In this case, unlocking a phone, but in other cases, it could potentially be your fingerprint when you enter a building, or whatever data is in your AI. It doesn't have to be hardware systems.
If you take this into the financial industry, KYC platforms, or even worse, an anti-money laundering platform, if you can trick an anti-money laundering platform, well, money laundering is going to be your hobby.
Yeah, exactly. And those are the exact types of attacks that we need to be aware of that are going to be happening. Any system that's going to have an AI decide on, hey, you can enter, you can't enter, you need to know that an attacker is going to try to extradite exactly how it works.
Of course.
Even with algorithms, an attacker is going to want to hack the algorithm and find out exactly how it works. And that's something that is very dangerous. What can you do to prevent that? Well, first of all, if you these attacks are very difficult to perform in a very small amount of interactions with the AI. They require kind of a lot of interactions. And what usually is required is that they will give the AI some input, then they will make a tiny modification to the input and look at how that affects the output. So this is something that you should probably detect. Like if I was Apple and I made Face ID...
You will be getting like millions of prompts to try out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like if I was Apple with Face ID, I would send an image of my face and then I would change like 3 pixels in the image and then send it again. And that's something you can filter out because no two images from Face ID are going to look so closely together that only a couple of pixels are different. So that's kind of a detection mechanism that should probably be in place. You should also definitely look at what output you're giving back. Are you giving too much information away? And this information, it can be in tiny details. Like even if you're just responding with true or false, just by the time it takes for you to generate that response, the attacker might be able to discern some information. So these details can really, really be minute. Another thing you can do is if you regularly retrain your model, then the weights will always change. So if an attacker has figured out a part of your model, if you retrain it, well, that information is kind of useless. So that's probably something you can also do. So there are ways to kind of mitigate this and to stop this from happening.
Interesting. You mentioned, so we talked about model inversion attack. You mentioned the prompt injection. What other typical attacks are there to AI systems?
Yeah, I think for me, excessive agency is the one that I have the most findings with right now. An excessive agency kind of just means that AI models right now have access to a lot of things, a lot of environments. I have seen AIs that are able to just write files anywhere on the file system. That are able to make requests anywhere in the internal network. That are able to execute commands on the file system. Those are things that are incredibly dangerous. And if you don't sandbox that properly, if you don't say, hey, the AI can only write files in this specific uploads folder, or the AI can only access the network that is not the internal network, or the AI can only execute commands in the specific sandbox that is created for that, then that is just a huge issue. But right now, so many applications are getting created using AI. I think the threat modeling step, where this is usually detected, and it's talked about, hey, are you sure that we want this behavior to allow all of that? That is often skipped because it's costly and it takes a lot of time, and these days, you have to code fast because before you know it, your competitor has built it. I think some security steps are missed here, and we're just giving AIs all the power it has and worrying about security later.
So it's a rush to production. It's a rush to be on top of the hype or on top of everything. And in that process, corners have been cut or being cut. Interesting. So. One of the holy grails for confidential compute is considered a TEE, a trusted execution environment. I guess you can't wait to hack into one of those, can you?
Yeah, I'm really curious on how it's going to work with hacking into it, because obviously TEs are very focused on hardware. So they're at a really low level. And what we've seen in the last 6 years is that hacking has gone into the higher levels. In the beginning, it was all buffer overflows, whatnot. And now the abstraction layers have gone higher and higher. So it's going to be interesting to see how such a low level environment is going to interact with applications. But to be fair, don't really think that I am going to interact with it a lot on that low level. I think that TEs are mostly something that's very interesting for the big cloud providers to work on and to implement. I don't think, the average company is very often going to get into contact with that low level. It's probably going to be a large provider that provides the environment and does everything. And I don't think that I will be hired by those large environments as a person, sadly, to hack on those systems. Although if somebody is watching, I'm interested. But so I don't think that directly I will come into contact a lot with that.
The promises of TEs are very high. The cost is also very high. The lock-in is very high, but it comes with a certain security factor. However, in a TEE, you're running unencrypted operations anyhow. So you decrypt all of your encrypted stuff when you execute it. And what's your take on homomorphic encryption, actually? So homomorphic encryption promises to just not do that, not decrypt ever your data to run compute operations. What's your take in the light of AI, or in general in the light of security?
I find it a very interesting development because we all know that you need to protect your data. You need to protect data in transit, which we figured out for years, right? You do a TLS encryption and your data is protected in transit. You need to protect your data in rest, which is obviously also has been solved. You can encrypt your databases. That's all fine. But what has never been solved is you need to protect your data in use, like while it's being used. Encrypt your data everywhere, but while it's being used, everybody is decrypting it. And if an attacker gets access to a system, then they can just look at the data in use and still have it unencrypted. So I'm hoping that homomorphic encryption will kind of bring a protection on that level to protect the data in use. And to me, it's just super interesting that I would be able to send my data to an AI system. Could encrypt it locally, use my private key, send the data across. The AI would be able to do its whole workings and use my data, but never be able to actually see what is inside of it, send me back an encrypted response. I could decrypt it, and I would cryptographically know that nobody was able to read what I sent to the AI system. I think that is so incredibly interesting. And yeah, that would be great for, anytime. I'm now talking at a personal level. If I share data with ChatGPT, I probably don't want them to be able to read it. But also at a larger scale, companies transferring data between each other. This is going to be huge. If medical records of people need to be shared with somebody else, well, why not do it in an encrypted measure so that, you don't... Right now, there's a lot of regulations with how the data can be handled. Well, if it's all encrypted, then that really doesn't matter anymore at that level.
Yeah, correct. I mean, it solves so many of the topics that you just touched upon, like the face recognition aspect. Okay, encrypt your face, send it over to Apple for device unlocking or locally. So those things, all encrypted data, that's one thing. The other attack that you found so interesting was a model inversion attack, where you can actually get back to the original training data. Well, forget it if the model is an encrypted model. So it solves so many of those issues that you just covered with just using one form of encryption.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's also very achievable. It doesn't require huge changes to our current way of working. It's achievable for every type of business, I think, that is using AI systems, or even broader for any system this kind of works. It is much more achievable than having to totally switch your hardware or whatnot. Right. Both have their merits. A solution that has both of them, I guess, is the holy grail. But yeah, I'm a big fan of homomorphic encryption, and I hope it becomes like very, very mainstream soon.
Well, obviously, I hope it too, because for the listeners listening in here, obviously, Wodan AI is all about homomorphic encryption and other protection of AI systems. So we put a high bet on the use of homomorphic encryption. Cool. Well, Robert, I have a last question for you. Before we wrap. So what is the future bringing for you? Do you have any big ambitions? Obviously, I'm sure you can't disclose who your next target will be, but what's on the radar for you?
Yeah, so every year I try to give myself a very big goal to achieve. Last year, my goal was to get 100 CVEs, so 100 published vulnerabilities in software. I did not achieve that goal. I reached 38
Maybe you put
CVEs,
the bar a bit too high.
Yes, but I don't mind putting the bar way too high, because if I had said I will get 20 CVEs, then I might have just only gotten to 20. But now I got to 38. So even not achieving the goal but getting somewhere is an achievement for me. And also, I started finding vulnerabilities in smaller libraries, but then realized, hey, this is a bit boring. I want to go for the big boys. So I went for, Amazon, Nvidia, which is obviously more difficult to find vulnerabilities in. But I haven't set a goal for this year, I don't think I mind that much. I think I want to take a year to just improve on what I've been doing and see where whatever I do leads me. I have kind of stopped hunting for vulnerabilities outside of my job for money because it is very difficult. Because for example, I submitted a critical vulnerability to Nvidia, and Nvidia told me, hey, look, it's a valid vulnerability, but you're not going to get payment because somebody found it 12 hours before you did. Those are very disheartening. So I kind of just want to hack whatever interests me. Like, for example, I have these key lights that light up my face. I was just like, hey, how do those work at a lower level? So I hacked them and I found a vulnerability in them. I just want to hack for fun, the things that I see around me, rather than focusing purely on money or finding bugs and big things. Yeah,
it's an interesting take, continuous learning, and also doing it for fun, so that you don't lose the fun and you don't lose your willingness to go further in this. So it's a great goal in itself.
Thank you. Yeah, hacking was always my hobby. It has now been my job for the past 6 years. But so outside of my work, I still want to make it my hobby. And once you start focusing too much on having to make money or having to have people respond to your reports, whatnot, then it all starts to become a strain and a job. And I still want it to be my hobby and my passion. And I need to make sure that I foster that it stays my passion, because I've kind of invested everything I have into being a decent hacker. So yeah, I want to make sure that I can keep doing that for a long, long time.
Well, I wish you all the best with that. Great stuff accomplished so far. Thank you again for your time and your insights to this podcast here. I found it very interesting to talk to you. This was the first edition of this Secure AI podcast, and what an opener it was with someone who already hacked into Nvidia and into AWS AI systems. So again, Robert, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and talk to you soon.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.